What of? The world is fast-moving and can be confusing.
So let's talk about it.
5 Live Breakfast with Rachel and Rick. Listen on BBC Sounds.
It's Friday, 12th of January, one day before Taiwan heads to the polls to elect their new leaders. Coming up, analysis on why this vote matters. Hello and welcome to Asia Business Report, this special broadcast coming to you live from Taipei. I'm Steve Lai, and we have plenty to come here about the upcoming election in Taiwan. But first, we've got to get to some news of a developing story over the last few hours. The UK and the US have launched airstrikes against Houthi rebels in Yemen in response to their attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Let's go to Suranjana Tiwari in Singapore for more on this story and the market reaction.
Steve, little market reaction so far, but crude oil futures are up more than 1% in early Asia trade. There's been so much disruption to shipping routes in that region in the last few months that markets may have priced this type of military action in. But it does seem significant that the US and UK have ordered military action in order to protect commercial interests. President Joe Biden saying the US will not allow Houthi attacks to imperil freedom of navigation. Britain's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak saying the UK will always stand up for freedom of navigation and free flow of trade. The big question is, will these strikes work? Britain's Defence Ministry saying that the strikes have already been a blow to the Houthis' ability to threaten merchant shipping. The real risk, of course, is that the conflict in Gaza will escalate throughout the Red Sea region. Some major shipping lines and oil giant BP have already diverted vessels around southern Africa, adding time and cost to journeys rather than risk the Red Sea. And if the crisis continues, the increased costs of oil as well as goods could be passed on to consumers, hampering efforts to curb inflation and reduce interest rates. The Houthi have attacked 27 ships to date, disrupting commerce on those key shipping lanes between Europe and Asia, and they account for about 15% of the world's shipping traffic. The boss of shipping giant Maersk has told the BBC why the waterways are so important to global trade.
This is one of the most important arteries of global trade. And having to reroute all of this cargo now south of the Cape of Good Hope is going to create significant disruptions to the global supply chain for the duration in which we have to do that, and probably a few months more as we have to get back then into normal. So you need to see, I think, a stronger mobilization. The other thing is that the level of threat is actually evolving. And so for the coalition that is trying to put in place this safe passage, they need to constantly reassess the level of protection. But for us, it is really important that this is being addressed with diligence and with a strong mobilization of the international community so that normal global trade can resume.
Bringing attention back to Taiwan, a crucial election that's happening tomorrow. One of the first things the winning party will need to deal with after the election here in Taiwan is to answer this question: how to deal with China. In the lead up to the polls, the world's second largest economy has warned of the extreme danger of electing the frontrunner from the ruling Democratic Progressive Party, while the opposition, Kuomintang, is viewed as being more friendly with Beijing. China, Taiwan's biggest trading partner, and also claims the self-ruled island as part of its own territory. Now, earlier, I spoke with Assistant Professor of Political Science, Lev Nachman, and I began by asking him whether the outcome of the election could change Taiwan's relations with China and the United States.
If the KMT wins this election, we see the potential for a reset in cross-strait dialogue between Taiwan and the PRC. And that would be meaningful, but it would also be quite a process in and of itself. If the DPP wins, then I think we're going to see more of the sort of very icy relationship between the two sides of the strait. Now, regardless of which party wins, I don't see a major change between the Taiwan and U.S. relationship. All three presidential candidates have actually made multiple trips to the United States to assure the United States and Washington, D.C. that all three are going to take a sort of Tsai Ing-wen 2.0 approach to the U.S.-Taiwan relationship, meaning they're going to continue this very robust dialogue and slow build of relations between the two places.
So it's really the Taiwan-China relationship that we may see some movement depending on who wins this election. So how would you characterize the relationship that they have at the moment?
At the moment, it's very cold. Unfortunately, the PRC has decided that it doesn't matter who from the DPP is in power. If someone in the DPP is in power, then they will not pick up the phone when Taiwan calls. And Tsai Ing-wen has tried to call. Tsai Ing-wen has tried to make connections to the PRC. It's the PRC that doesn't pick up the phone, unfortunately. Even though Tsai Ing-wen herself, for the last 8 years, we've come to know her for her very pragmatic, moderate policies. But from the PRC's perspective, because she's from the DPP, that's a zero starter.
Yeah, so if only one party is talking to the other, that certainly complicates the relationship. How does that play out when we're talking about trade?
So for trade, it's interesting because the Taiwan PRC relationship has not really iced in terms of trade, at least until in the last couple of weeks where we've seen the PRC threaten parts of ECFA as a way to try to coerce Taiwanese voters into voting for the KMT. But even despite the very icy relations in terms of no dialogue between the two sides of the strait, we've seen a very robust trading partnership between the two sides. And ultimately, this helps at the very least keep peace and remind Xi Jinping that any sort of war with Taiwan would be very costly, not just in terms of human lives, but also would very much damage the PRC's ability to continue its economic growth.
Yeah, because both parties do have mutual benefit from keeping relations, intact in some degree. What will be the priority then for Taiwan's government of the day come Sunday when we have a new party in place?
Ultimately, the first challenge is going to be a matter of trying to unify the country, because when you have 3 presidential candidates running, Taiwan is incredibly divided right now. And really the message that whoever wins, whether it's Lai Ching-te, Hou Yu-ii, or Ko Wen-je, they need to send a message of unity with the hope that we can try to move past this very vicious election cycle and move towards a place where everyone can sort of find a starting point to continue a new government.
And are you optimistic for Taiwan's future then when it comes to cross-strait relations and its relations with the US?
I see signs of Joe Biden and Xi Jinping trying to find a floor to stand on. I see signs that there are more efforts by Taiwan to try to reach out to the PRC. It's the PRC that I hope is willing to hear those messages from Taiwan. But there is reasons to be hopeful. Unfortunately, there's also reasons to not be hopeful, because even despite this, attempts to create a floor to stand on, the PRC has taken a lot more aggressive approaches this election cycle through military threats, through economic threats, and through more rhetorical threats.
Meanwhile, ahead of the election, the younger generation in Taiwan find themselves in a curious predicament, because on the one hand, the self-ruled island is lauded as an advanced economy by the International Monetary Fund, and a high-income one at that by the World Bank. But as I found out when I hit the streets of Taiwan, when it comes to how they feel about that and how they feel going forward, they're just not getting a sense of that progress when it comes to their bank balance. This is Shementing, a popular shopping and eating district in the heart of Taipei. And I've come here to get the thoughts of young people ahead of the elections on January the 13th. The reason I'm speaking to young people aged 20 to 34 is because they make up 1/5 of the electorate. And that number may not seem like a big one, but with an election this close, it could be a decisive factor.
Even foreign caregivers have a higher basic salary than us, so actually, regarding hope or expectation for the future, actually is quite dark and hopeless.
I hope that property prices can be controlled, and if cross-strait relations remain stable, I may be more concerned about that. But if there are some actions on the other side of the strait, I will be more concerned about national security.
Because most of my classmates around me have relatively high salaries, and it's more related to their education background. So in general, you could say that the salary and benefits are good. But I have also heard about quite a few friends who only earn a little over $1,000 after entering society. I feel that this disparity is quite large.
It's clear that many younger voters feel trapped in a cycle of higher costs of living and rising inequality. But as Su Wen-tai, an economics professor in Taipei, told me, neither of the main parties competing in this election have a long-term solution.
You can say that housing issues is everywhere, okay? In Hong Kong as well, and then in Korea or Singapore. But then the difference is that you have to look at the number of the housing price to income ratio. So the housing price to income ratio is the highest in Taiwan compared than these other countries that I just mentioned. So all the major party was doing is like trying to please voters in one way or the other. So cutting tax and then raising, just spending more. And so the issue is that it's going to lead to more government debt in the future. And so who's going to pay for the debt? So if you are young and urban, you're educated, then you start to think that that's an issue.
As young Taiwanese people head to the polls, these struggles will be on their minds. It's something the next administration will have to contend with: how to tackle the rising cost of living and home prices.
Now a quick recap of our top story this hour. The United States and Britain have carried out military strikes against Houthi rebel targets in Yemen. President Biden has said that the strikes were in coordination with Washington's partners and followed an extensive diplomatic campaign. Now, the Iran-backed Houthis have been attacking commercial vessels in the Red Sea since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. And for all the reaction to those airstrikes by the US and UK forces on Houthi rebels, and for continuing updates on Taiwan's elections, you can visit our website, bbc.com. We'll bring you the latest developments happening today and over the weekend. In the meantime, I'll see you in about an hour's time, right here on BBC News.